Hello, and welcome to this Unity tutorial on Scripting Fundamentals Part 1. I'm so excited to jump on into the world of C# programming with you, as today we're going to take a look at how to break down the various components of a C# script. I remember the first time that I jumped into Unity, and looking at a C# script as well as the editor that we were using was very overwhelming. We will walk through each of the components of how to set up a C# script and attach it to a game object in this video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into it. Now I've gone ahead and created an empty Unity 2D project. If you need help doing that, please visit the project setup video on this channel. So what we're going to do is in the Assets folder at the very bottom of your screen, go ahead and right-click in that folder. In the pop-up menu, go ahead and select Create, and then select C# script. This will pop up a C# script for you to give a name to. As far as naming conventions go, we want to use the most descriptive name that we can based on what the purpose of that script is. So for example, we're going to make a script that's going to move an image across the screen. So I'm going to call my script movement. So let's go ahead and type in movement with the first M uppercase. A few more naming conventions. Try not to put special characters and numbers in the names of your C# scripts, as well as if you have multiple words like my first script, don't have any spaces between them. So let me show you an example here. If we were to do that, it would be my first script, all one word, each word capitalized, just like that. If you do put spaces in there, Unity will throw some errors. Okay, I said let's call this movement and go ahead and press enter. Now, it's created it down here in the Assets folder, but we want to be able to edit it. So on your machine, when you installed Unity, you should have also had the option to install Visual Studio if you are using it on your personal computer. Otherwise, if you are on a lab machine, it will automatically open. Go ahead and double-click on the movement, and this will launch the Visual Studio. You likely have a newer version, 2019 or greater. However, the version will not matter for this video. Alright, so here is that movement script. I'm going to go ahead and press Control and zoom in with my mouse, just so that we can be able to see the script a little bit better together. Okay, so there is a lot of stuff here, and especially if you haven't seen a script before, I understand that this is going to be a little bit confusing. So let's break down each of the components, starting at the very beginning. So the first three lines we see using this, using that, and using the Unity engine. So these are called import statements. For now, we're going to call them libraries. For you non-programmers out there, a really good example that I like to give is Park Library at Central Michigan University contains thousands upon thousands of books inside of it. Well, as our projects begin to get a bit bigger, we're going to have more and more scripts. And it would be very helpful if we were able to organize these scripts into logical containers, or units you could say. And when we do that with books, we end up with a library. We have a conglomeration of books in a library, and we'll be able to reference specific books in the library. So for example, this third line could be using Park Library at Central Michigan University. This second line here could be using the library at Michigan State University. This one could be using the University of Michigan Library. Completely separate entities, but by using the notation using, we're basically saying I may want to use some scripts inside of you at some point, which is why I'm referencing your library. Now that is more of an advanced concept and outside the scope of this video, but for those who like to know everything that's going on inside a script, I did want to provide a general overview of that. Okay, continuing on line 5, we have a bunch of stuff going on here, and this is probably the most complex line out of this entire program. We have 5 things happening in this line: public, class, movement, the colon, and mono behavior. So starting from left to right, we have the public. So this is a keyword inside of C#. A keyword is a reserved word that only C# can use. Examples of keywords: public, class, void, start, update, using. Basically anything that's blue. Now this is blue, technically, maybe closer to teal, but this represents something different that we'll talk about in a second. So, public, what does that mean? If something is public, that means anyone can access it, right? The opposite of public would be private. And we wouldn't want our classes to be private in the sense that we wouldn't even be able to attach them to a game object per se. We get some errors when trying to do that. When we put our books or scripts into our libraries like this, we want to be able to reference them. To be able to do that, this has to be public. So that's why we have public. The next thing is class. So class is such a fundamental concept in programming. To keep it very simple, a class is what we are writing our code inside of. But wait a second, this entire document is what we're writing our code inside of. Yes and no, and let me explain that. So what is actually going to run when we attach this to an object in our Unity scene is going to be the contents of the class. The contents of the class are denoted by the opening and closing curly brackets here. An important rule of thumb is when you are programming, you want to make sure to have the same number of opening and closing curly brackets. If I were to, and don't do this, but if I were to delete this very last one, go ahead and save it by doing Control S. You probably notice already there's a little red squiggly right there. And if I were to go to Unity, you should see here at the bottom that there is some red text. If we click on the console is actually erroring, and it's saying, hey, in your assets folder, the movement.cs is that C# extension. On line 17, you are missing a closing curly bracket. It's saying this is expected. Okay, so we go down here, line 17, it's saying, hey, I need you to put a closing curly bracket. So we'll go ahead and do that, just like that. Now, Visual Studio is going to auto-format that for you. It wouldn't matter, though, if it was right there or if it was right here, because C# scripts are not dependent upon spaces. Everything is dependent upon these opening and closing curly brackets as well as semicolons that we'll see later. This could all technically be on one giant line where we just have, for example, the methods right after this. Now this one worked because we have a comment here, and if we were to put anything else in this line such as that, that's also going to comment it out. We'll talk about comments in a moment, but a comment is just a way for you to write a little note to yourself about what this method is doing. Alright, so the class, going back to it, we write all of the stuff that we want this program to do inside of the class. So all of this stuff is part of that class. This stuff up here is not part of the class. This is outside of the public class movement. This is just part of the generalized C# script. Okay, so then we have movement. Movement was the name of that script that we defined back inside of Unity. You'll notice that the name here needs to match this name here. Go ahead and select project. If for some reason you were to name this different, so if I were to change this to, or maybe put an extra T on it, like that, you'll notice this name does not match this anymore, which is going to be an issue because if we had a game object in our scene, let me go ahead and add a game object. We'll do a 3D object cube, and I'm going to use my translation tools just to position the cube so I can see it. With the cube selected in the hierarchy, if I were to try and attach this script to this object, one way that you can do it is by click holding and dragging this script onto the inspector here. And when you do that, you're going to get this error, cannot add script component movement because the script class cannot be found. So the reason why that's happening is because here you're declaring that the name is movement.cs. Here you're declaring that it's movement with 2 T's. Once we get rid of that second T and save it, we'll be able to go ahead and attach that script to this cube just like that. And you'll be able to see movement here now. Okay, we'll come back to this in just a moment. Alright, so the next thing after the name is this colon, and this colon does mean something. What we have going on here is inheritance. So inheritance is an object-oriented programming principle where we have a parent class and a child class, and they share a relationship between them such that the child class is going to inherit all of the attributes and public methods of the parent class. Now that probably doesn't mean a lot to our non-programmers here, and I completely understand that. Just take away from this video that we have a class called movement, and then this is also another C# class, just like this movement one, except this one is filled with a lot more stuff inside of it. For this script and all other scripts to be able to be attached to a game object in your scene, they have to derive in one way or another from the monobehavior class. By derive, we mean that inheritance relationship which is specified via this colon in C#. In other languages such as Java, you may be familiar with the extends keyword, or in Python you would put it inside of parentheses. Okay, so all I need you to take away from that again is we have a movement class, a monobehavior class, and the movement class is getting all of the attributes, which is like data, and behaviors, which is our methods, from the movement. That's not going to be terribly important for what we're doing in today's video, but for those people that do like to know what is going on. Alright, so now let's actually get to the contents of the class. Starting off here, we have the start function. So right above this start function, we actually have a comment, which is denoted by a double slash. A comment is just a way for you to write a note to yourself or write a note to other programmers, more specifically, telling them what this method does. This is especially helpful for those methods that get really complex, and it's really hard to understand just by doing a quick graze through the code. There are two types, or two primary ways that you can do comments. This is the single line, so if it's in a green color just like this, you'll know that it's a comment. If I start typing here though, notice that's not in green, it's underlining in red saying, hey, that's not valid C# programming. The other type is the multi-line comment, and you can make that by doing this slash star and pressing enter a few times and then closing it off with another slash, another star slash, just like that. Okay. This is a multi-line comment, so now I can type anything I want across these lines, and it will not interfere with the execution of the C# script. So that's just really nice. If you have a lot of stuff to type out, you can do it in a multi-line fashion to keep your text formatted a little bit better. Okay, let's actually talk about the start and update function now. So we have void start. So the void is a return type. There's a multitude of return types in the C# programming language, such as int, which represents your counting numbers, or float or double, which are your decimal numbers. We're not going to talk about those, but I do want to make you aware of them. A void essentially means, hey, this function is not going to return anything. Basically what the purpose of this function is just to execute a series of statements. So void, just kind of associate with, well, it's going to execute this, but that's all it's going to do. It's just going to execute these lines of code. Start and update are reserved keywords inside of Unity C# because they both do very specific things. The start function is going to be run at the very beginning of your scene. An example of this is if I were to come in here, and I would encourage you to type along with me, we're going to print something to the screen, or to the console more specifically. We're going to say debug.log, and in here, let us type hello. Just like that. You'll want to put the word hello in quotation marks because this is called a string. A string is just a series of letters, just like the English language is and what we're typing here, but it's letting C# know that we want to print this word hello out onto the screen. So this statement here, just make sure to have the semicolon at the very end. That's very important. It allows the C# compiler to know when the statement ends. If you don't have that, it will throw an error. And make sure to save this so it doesn't have that little star by pressing Control S and go back to Unity now. And if you didn't follow along with me previously, that is okay. Go ahead and create a cube just like this, 3D object cube, and then go ahead and select on it in the hierarchy so that you can view the properties of it in the inspector, and then go ahead and drag and drop it onto here so that you get the movement script to show up just like that. And then I'd like you to go ahead and select the console. And then your settings should be just like this. I like to have it set up so it collapses. If I have a multitude of statements, for example, like it's printing hello over and over again, it will collapse them into one single line. We'll see that in just a second, and also clear on play. So every time you start the application by pressing the play button, it will clear out your log essentially. And I think it's just easier to see what it does when we go ahead and press play. So with that saved, we'll press play, and we see the word hello printed out to the console. So that's really nice. If we go ahead and unplay this now, the messages are still going to say, but then when we play again, it's going to disappear very briefly. You notice the time changed on it, and it says hello again. So the start function is going to run at the very beginning of the scene before the update function runs, and the start function is generally used for setting up some code or setting up some properties that you're going to be using on your game object or other game objects in the scene. If we want to contrast that with the update function, go ahead and copy this with Control C, and we'll just remove it and paste it inside of the update function. Go ahead and save it just like that, and this will explain more or less what the update function does. If we go ahead and press play now, we'll see hello. Nothing really changed over here, but if we take a look over here, this number is rapidly increasing. If we uncheck the collapse, you'll see, oh, we got a lot of hello messages printing here. Well, what's actually happening here is the update function is acting as a sort of loop. So a loop is just something that happens over and over again, and being a descendant of the MonoBehavior class, one of the things that it does is it calls this update function. Now this update function is called approximately 60 times a second, or 60 frames a second based on your refresh rate, but for the time being, just assume that it's roughly 60 times a second. So hello is being printed out that many times a second. This is really good if you want to be able to detect input from the user, such as button presses or anything of that nature, or being able to move objects across the screen. We'll see that in an upcoming tutorial in scripting part 2. But those are the two primary functions. We call these two blocks here functions. Anything that is inside of the opening and closing curly brackets will run when this function is called. Alright, so that is all that I wanted to cover for this scripting tutorial part 1. In part 2, we're going to take a look at variables and methods and how to move an object across the screen. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to leave them as a comment on this video. We will get notified, but always feel free to reach out to your instructor for more direct help. Thank you very much.